first people I've ever heard that were like, I'm really worried about the last of the baby boomers leaving, right? Because most of the people that I am around believe that the baby boomers have hung on to power and continued to pull value out of the organizations far longer than they've been contributing into them. And so, like, there are no management positions to move to. There is no way to prevent the organization from becoming ossified because it's being run and instantiated by groups of old people.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that this is true. And there's this sort of perverse way that these are like, that like this thing you're saying causes the thing that I'm saying, where a lot of the way that you're going to produce competent people is by having them sort of naturally rise up the ranks and sort of learn each thing one step at a time. Like the Romans had one of the really dramatic versions of this. They had the cursus honorum, which is the road of honors, which is all the positions you're supposed to go through in the right order if you're going to be the consul, the sort of top guy. Where first, you're going to like run for local office, then you're going to be like the aide to a military governor. That you're going, I don't have the order right, but it's like you're going to govern.
This is very, very common in other places where you go sit in all the chairs or you do your round around the table, right? So you start in one position, secretary, then treasurer, and then move all the way around until eventually you're vice president, then past president.
Right. But the thing is that, this is a generalization. There's many exceptions, but for the most part, the boomers were not paying much attention to succession. They were not making sure that the younger people went through all of the steps. They were not, stepping aside so that a younger person could move into the vice president's chair and learn those things. And so this gives you, one, the boomers just being in there forever until they're carried out with their shoes on. And two, it gives the people my age, like, for those who are going through the sort of institutional track and waiting to be promoted, you just don't get nearly as many opportunities to learn. And so this means that when we do run out of boomers, like you just don't have people who have been training and are ready to step into those. There just haven't been very many opportunities to learn to be able to do that well.
Yeah, I think that's going on in academia as well, right? I think a lot of people are staying on as dean and chairmen of departments for way longer than they used to. And instead of having a new person that was making a really crap wage after they got out of college to getting a little bit more, to taking on more responsibility. But part of that responsibility is getting along with other departments, getting the university to be more active and updated. But the whole university system to me seems incredibly ossified right now and generally run by bureaucrats.
Yeah. And like the bureaucratization is sort of a separate thing, but like it's also a pretty big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like I work with a lot of student groups, and what you end up finding out is there's a professional that's in either at the head office or something that actually steps in and does everything because they're paid to do that. That's their job. And so the very thing that young people could be getting, which is experience putting together a conference or doing these things, they've made it a transaction and they've offshored it to the bureaucrat whose job it is. And you see that harming the way that those things get structured, because kids would set up a different conference than the professional would. And then you see it in them not learning the skills that they would normally get just from interacting with people outside of academia.
Right. And like, if you read the stuff that was written in those periods, there's this biography of this guy who went on to become the chair of General Electric. And when he was in college in I guess this would be 1900, 1910 or something, he's doing a bunch of this organizing. He's running the speeches and the conferences, doing the campaigning for the presidential candidate who he wants to win, just like on his own by just like knocking on his buddies' doors. If you look at the 60s, the radicals there are organizing their marches. They're organizing like the physical occupations of the campuses. They're not like going to the dean for help with that because the deans are opposed to it. They don't want to be kicked out of their own offices. The students are doing all that themselves.
This is really interesting, and it makes me deeply wonder what you think of where culture is at right now in the U.S. You had mentioned that things are kind of as fervent as maybe they were in the McCarthy era, But where does this go? Do we have, a Maoist revolt? Does Pol Pot come to the top in the U.S., or is this absolutely overblown and really what we're going to be dealing with is domestic terrorism? Because it seems like the conversations are all around these wildly different poles.
Yeah, so I think that if you're looking at like any of those sort of extreme large-scale violence things, I don't think that's in the cards. I don't think the people behind this have the psychological setup to be personally conducting the violence. I think if they did, you'd already be seeing it. And like the amount of violence that we've seen is like pretty low. And there was a little bit last year, but it was mostly of this type of like almost the sort that you get when you have like, two hunter-gatherer tribes screaming at each other in this sort of ritualized way. And like, sometimes it gets a little overboard and someone gets hit too hard kind of deal. And less of the sort of like targeted assassinations and bombings that you saw a lot of in the 70s. I don't think we're even going to hit that level, let alone like, serious something like the Troubles. I think like that would absolutely shock me. If that happens, then just stop taking me seriously. Because, like I think that it's going to be like a lot of shakeups and like people within the elite using this type of thing to maneuver for position, to be like, these people who are in power here are unethical in these ways and they need to be removed and we need to take their place so that we can do things better. And you're going to see a bunch of shuffling. Again, this is much closer to what you saw in the 50s. There was not a whole lot of like mass violence, but there was a lot of institutional rejiggering. And I think that that's much more what we're going to see.
That's interesting. There may be a parallel between that and the Me Too movement, right? Like you had these really instantiated high level celebrity people, Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, like people that had been in these roles that maybe in the past would have been, maybe they would have been handing down, bringing other people up. But instead, the institutional shakeup was, we have changed cultural norms and you were on the other side of that line and we're going to really pound you really hard for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's quite important here that the sort of like big head on a pike there is Harvey Weinstein, who is less important as like a celebrity. I'd never heard of him before all that happened, and more important as this sort of like behind the scenes fixer, sort of institutional lubricant type role. And I think that's actually very significant about it, because I think that's much more what it's targeting.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.